Very good morning, everybody. So, last class we had started with the unit called Survey Procedures in Dentistry, and in the last two videos we had discussed about what is the definition of survey. Survey is basically a non-experimental investigation. Then, how do you classify survey based on different headings? That is based on number of times data is collected, based on type of data, based on the design of the study, and based on the population covered. Then, just dealt in detail about that. Then we had started with what is sampling. What is the need for sampling, what are the terminologies related to sampling, what do you mean by sampling error, how do you classify sampling methods into probability and non-probability sampling, what are the different methods of probability sampling, and what are the different methods of non-probability sampling. We had dealt with that with the help of an example. So that is where we stop. Now going to the next topic for today, it is steps in survey. So what are the procedural steps in conducting a survey or epidemiological survey? So there are 7 essential steps in the conduct of a survey. The first is establishing an objective. Second is designing the investigation. Third is selection of sample. Fourth is collection of data or examination. Fifth is analyzing the results. Sixth is drawing the conclusion. And seventh is publishing the results. So in today's class, we'll be dealing with details regarding each step. So the first is establishing an objective. So as with any investigation, as with any type of study, the first thing you need to know is you need to establish an objective. Okay, so establish an objective. There are certain criteria for establishing an objective. The objective should be specific, it should be measurable, it should be achievable or attainable, it should be realistic or relevant, and it should be time based or time bound, and hence it is abbreviated with an acronym known as SMART objective. S stands for specific, M stands for measurable, A stands for achievable, R stands for relevant, and T stands for time based. So any objective should have these 5 criteria. Now what are, for example, if you are planning to conduct a survey to know the dental caries experience of 12-year-old school children in Nellikudi. Suppose you want to know what is the caries prevalence in 12-year-old school children in Nellikudi. That is an objective. Okay. So when you talk about this objective, it is specific because you are dealing with the prevalence of dental caries in a 12-year-old school population. It is measurable because definitely you can measure caries. It is achievable. It is not something that is not realistic. It is relevant because caries is a common public health problem in many communities, and there has to be a time frame. So you need to have a time frame to complete the study. Maybe in the next 1 month, I'll be assessing the prevalence of dental caries among 12-year-old school children. So this is what is called as a SMART objective. Okay. The next is you should design the investigation. Now this part of the topic we have already covered in the last class. Now depending on your objective, you need to select which type of survey you are going to deal with. What I have given in this slide is basically that classification which we have already talked about. So a survey can be cross-sectional or longitudinal depending on number of times the data is collected. Now in this example, I want to know the prevalence. Prevalence means you are just knowing the total number of old and new cases. You are not going to repeatedly go to the same population and identify which is the new disease. That is when it is called as an incidence survey. So this study, for this example, we require a cross-sectional survey or a prevalence survey. So among the first classification, this design has to be cross-sectional for this objective. The second set of classification is based on how the data is collected. You can divide it into health examination survey, health interview survey, or you can assess it based on healthcare record survey, or you can distribute a questionnaire and assess the data. So for this example, we can go with health examination survey because in order to know what is the caries prevalence, you cannot take an interview. Neither you can distribute a questionnaire. The only 2 possibilities are either you have to go directly, examine the children, 12-year-old children, and find out how many of them have caries. Or else if they have a school health record where they have caries recorded every year in the medical checkup which is conducted annually, you can take a record. But that is also a very rare possibility. The best of these four methods is you need to go personally to these schools, go to this 12-year-old population, examine how many of them have dental caries. So that is called as health examination survey. So that is the second classification. The third classification is you are trying to describe what is the prevalence. You are not trying to analyze why this caries is more or why caries is less. If you are going to analyze those data, it is called as analytical survey. If you are just going to describe what is the prevalence, it is going to be a descriptive survey. I am just trying to help you understand this designing the investigation with the help of an example. Okay? The fourth is census survey or a sample survey. Maybe Nellikoi has 10 schools. And maybe in each school there are 100 students, so it comes to 1000 students. It might not be possible for you to practically go and examine all the 1000 students. So you might have a target of around 500 students, and that is called as a sample survey. In case you are examining all the 1000 students, for example, it is going to be a census survey. So depending on your material, manpower, money and time, you can decide whether you want it to be a census survey or you want it to be a sample survey. Usually, when you have a large number of population, they all go with sample survey rather than a census survey. So that is about designing the investigation. So the first step was establishing an objective. The objective was specific, measurable, achievable, realistic or relevant and time bound. So that is what is called as a SMART objective, to measure the prevalence of dental caries among 12-year-old school-going children in Nellikoi. Okay. So designing the investigation, you need to select, depending on the four classifications, what type of investigation suits your objective. So for the example we considered, I would like to make it a cross-section survey because I need a prevalence. I'll go with a health examination survey, a descriptive survey and a sample survey. Okay, I hope the first 2 points are clear. Now the third step again is what we have discussed in detail in the last class, selecting the sample. Now, depending on, say, an arbitrary number of 1000 is my sampling frame, I want 500 people. I better go with the probability sampling because as far as the theory of sampling is concerned, your non-probability sampling is not very much accurate. It is judgmental. Means it is the chance that a person is selected is unequal and known. So this can affect the results of your study. So because of that, always in such circumstances, it is better to go with the probability sampling method. So in probability sampling, this is not a very large population to do a multi-stage or multi-phase. It is neither a very small population to do a simple random or systematic random. What you can consider is you can divide it into, you can do it based on a stratified random or a cluster sampling or an area sampling. Cluster, I told you, there are 10 schools. From 10 schools, randomly select 5 schools. That becomes a cluster. Or divide Nellikoi into areas, different areas based on north, south, east or west, select 2, north and west. So that is called as area sampling. Or depending on the number of students in each school, proportionately select from each school, that is stratified random. So depending on the objective of the study, again select what is the best sampling design that suits your survey. So the third step is selecting the sample. So if you are writing, the question can come as what are the steps in survey is the main question. So in each, you need to explain what we discussed so far. First is establishing an objective, write about SMART objective. Designing an investigation, write in detail about the 4 types of classification of surveys, and that we have discussed in the last class. The third is selection of sample, write in detail about what is sample, what are the sampling and nomenclatures associated with sampling, what are sampling errors, what is sampling universe, sampling frame sample, then classify it into probability, non-probability. Write at least the indications for each probability sampling and non-probability sampling. Depending on the marks, you can elaborate regarding this because sampling itself can be asked as a main question. So depending on the marks allotted, you can elaborate on each point. So these are the first 3 points: establishing an objective, designing the investigation. The third is selecting the sample. Now next is collection of data or examination. Why it is put under single heading is this changes depending on what type of survey you are going to do. If you are going for a health examination survey, it is called examination. If you are going for a health record survey or health interview survey or maybe a questionnaire survey, you call it data collection. So everywhere it is collection of data, but in the health examination survey, it is known as the examination. The rest are all either collected through questionnaires or through interviews or based on some records. So that together comes under the heading called as collection of data or examination. This step, it differs for each type of survey. Okay, so there are some common points for every in this step, because the first step always is once you decide to collect the data, be it examination or collection of data, the first thing you need to do is obtain approval from authorities. For example, you need to go to 5 schools, go to the principals and obtain permission that you need to conduct the study and permit us to conduct. This is called as obtaining approval from the authorities. The next is called budgeting, because there is always cost involved in logistics. You need to carry instruments, you need fuel, you need manpower, so you need the selection of materials, you need pro forma to record. All these are there. So there is always a budgeting involved. So do the budgeting there beforehand before you start venturing to collect the data. So first is obtaining approval from authorities. Second, you know where all to go. Budget, have a budget. The third is schedule. Now, what is the importance of scheduling? Is have a proper timetable where to go when you can avoid unnecessary expenditure here. If you're going towards one area, covering 2 schools, cover it on the same day and commute. You have to schedule it. A pre-schedule will save on your material, manpower and money resources. So do a scheduling where you have to go, when you have to go, how you have to go. That is called as schedule. Okay. And the fourth one is especially in case of a health examination survey. Suppose you go to a place, you are doing a health examination, you might come across some emergencies. If at all you come across an emergency in dental conditions, you might see an abscess or you might see a trauma or any emergency. If at all you come across any emergency, you should have a system for referral. Thankfully, if you have a college, we are dealing with Nelipuri, for example, we have a college there, so you can refer the patients there in case of emergency. There should be a provision for emergency care and referral, because many times when we go to the population and find out only, you get to know that that requires an urgent attention, and that is why you need to have a referral center. It doesn't look good that you just collect the data and say that it is dangerous and come back. So whenever you are going for health examination survey, one additional point you need to know is provision for emergency care and referral should be preferably there. Next is another important point, validity and reliability of data collection. Now, what is the importance of validity and reliability? You have heard about validity and reliability when we have been discussing index. Now, what is validity? Validity is something that you need to measure what you have to measure. Yes. For example, you are asked to give an examination in public dentistry, and I come and give you a question paper in oral medicine. That is not a valid way to assess your knowledge in public dentistry. Similarly, if you are going to assess dental caries, record those indices which measure dental caries, not any index which measures some other disease. So you should make sure that whatever you are recording is valid. Okay, somebody has to supervise what you are recording. They need to know that whatever you are doing is valid. If it is invalid, if you try to take a index, you take something and all in this, you are unnecessarily wasting time. So that is what is meant by validity. You should measure what you are supposed to measure. That is called as validity. And reliability is any number of times you repeat the data. Provided the condition has not changed, you should get the same result. Suppose you go to a survey, maybe 15 of you will be going to collect the data. Now this 15 of you should be recording alike. It is not that for the same case, one person records it as decay, one person records it as filled, one person records it as sound tooth. That doesn't make any sense, because ultimately it affects your outcome of the results. So there has to be reliability. Everybody should be measuring alike. So for that, what you have to do before going to the survey, you need to standardize the things. You need to train the examiners and calibrate the examiners. So that is what we'll be discussing in the next video regarding what is the importance of this standardization and calibration. Okay. Thank you.